Imagine you show up to vote in November, something you've been doing for years. You walk into the same polling place you've walked into for decades. Heck, your grandmother even voted there. So you go in and you hand over your driver's license, the same one you've always used. But this year, someone tells you it's not enough. How about your birth certificate, they say? That thing in a safety deposit box in a town you haven't lived in for 20 years? Well, what about your passport? Probably expired during the pandemic and you never got a chance to renew it. And to date, you voted in every midterm election since Clinton was president. But today you can't. Now that sounds extreme, right? That's an extreme example. That sounds like something that would never happen in 2026 America. And here's the thing. It's not going to happen to most people, but it is going to happen to millions of people specifically. And that's the plan. And the mechanism for it is already in motion. In fact, last week, Donald Trump addressed the nation from the White House about exactly this. Here's what he told the country.
But we still have a major challenge that must be urgently addressed because no country can be great without fair and honest elections. You have to trust your country because every American deserves to know that when they cast their vote, that vote will be counted accurately in a system, and that is to make that system secure, one where cheating and interference are not just difficult, but virtually impossible. Unfortunately, the system we have today falls catastrophically short of that standard. Tonight, I'm announcing the immediate declassification and release of critical intelligence, revealing shocking vulnerabilities in our election infrastructure.
Be clear about something at the top. The documents he declassified that night, they didn't show what he said they showed. CBS, PBS, the AP, multiple outlets fact-checked this in real time. A lot of people didn't even run it, the news channels. The documents largely confirmed that the 2020 election was secure. But that's not what maybe millions of people heard. I mean, it wasn't well watched. It wasn't highly rated. But what they heard was the president of the United States during prime time telling them that their election system is broken. And here's the part a lot of people don't know. The speech wasn't the whole play, because behind the speech there's a bill, and behind the bill lies the pattern. What's going on, everybody? I'm DeAntony Collins, and this is The Quiet Loud, where we don't just talk about what's happening. We connect the dots behind what's happening. Please, if you're still here, go ahead and give us a like and subscribe. Share it with your friends or whoever needs to hear it. So let's talk about the bill behind all of this. It's called the Save America Act. And if you haven't heard of it, that's not exactly by accident. The bill's chief Senate advocate, Majority Leader John Thune, explained it like this.
It is a package of common sense policies, the kind of common sense policies that should get an automatic yes vote from literally every member of this body. At the core of the Save America Act is the requirement that individuals provide proof of citizenship to register to vote and then show an ID when they go to the polls. In other words, it would require Americans to demonstrate that they're eligible to vote and that they are who they say they are when they go to do so. Not to keep using the word common sense, but it's pretty common sense, right? We require photo ID for a whole lot of things in this country.
He said common sense. Automatic yes. That was what he used in his pitch, right? Require proof of citizenship. Show ID at the polls. I mean, we do it for everything else, right? Planes, doctors, buying cold medicine. All right. So shouldn't we be doing it for voting? That sounds familiar, right? That's what they've been saying for years on this voter ID tip, right? And here's where it gets interesting, because the politics of this bill are way more complicated than Thune wants you to think. That's why he doesn't want you to really know about it. Here's how CBS described that fight.
The president has since called for additional reforms, including a near ban on mail-in voting. He also wants to deal with some transgender issues, keeping men out of women's sports. So that's an added component that he would like to see attached to this legislation. In fact, just last week when he was addressing House Republicans at his resort in Doral, he suggested that the speaker kind of rewrite this bill. So that is not what we're expecting to happen this this week, but over in the Senate, they are going to take up that version that has already cleared the House. And it's possible, though, because of some of those changes that the president requested, that we could see some Republican senators try to add on those provisions through an amendment. Still, we expect this to be a very drawn-out, protracted debate. Democrats have called this new measure very restrictive. In the words of Chuck Schumer, the minority leader, he's referred to it as a Jim Crow 2.0 in terms of some of the...
Now, the question I'm asking is different. It's not whether this bill passes. I don't think it will. It's not whether it's popular. I don't think it is in the Senate. Okay, I think it's doomed to die, which is why I think Thune has a workaround for it. The question is, why does a bill that sounds like common sense produce a result that looks exactly like Jim Crow? Because the SAVE Act isn't new. It's updated. I talked before about how a lot of these patterns recur. They come back over and over again. You ever notice how every election cycle, there's a new voting law that everybody's just fighting about now? 1 year is voter ID. And then we're talking about polling place closures, right? Another year, they could be talking about ballot drop boxes. Sometimes they're even getting into signature matching requirements, okay? The specific policy always changes. It revolves, but the feelings don't, all right? Think about those words again for a moment. Thune called it common sense. And on the surface, requiring an ID to vote doesn't sound unreasonable. But here's the thing. In America, not everyone has the same access to identification. And not everyone has the same access to the documents you would even need to get that identification. Now, bear with me because this is where the pattern starts to reveal itself. In 2013, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act in the Shelby County decision. And with hours of that ruling, states started passing new voting restrictions. We saw it in Texas, in North Carolina, Alabama, Georgia, others, okay? By 2021, Georgia had passed SB 202, a law that made it harder to vote by mail. They limited drop boxes, and they even made it illegal to give water to people waiting in line at the polls. I mean, come on. North Carolina passed its own voter ID laws, okay? Same playbook, same language, election integrity, common sense. We heard it all the time, all right? Now, separately, those laws sound like isolated political fights, right? But when you step back, you start to see that pattern. The language changes, okay? The bill names change, but the targets of that language and those bills don't, okay? Here's the part that a lot of people don't know. The SAVE Act takes the pattern further than any of those state laws. This isn't just about showing ID at the polls anymore. It's about requiring documentary proof of citizenship just to register. In person, in specific forms, and if the name on your birth certificate doesn't match your current legal name, which is true for millions of married women, you need additional documentation. That brings us to something that I think gets misunderstood all the time. Who actually gets blocked by a law like this? Sometimes the numbers matter more than the argument. So let me give you some of the numbers. More than 21 million Americans do not have ready access to documents proving they're American citizens. That's not my number. That's what CNBC reported. Take a look.
More than 21 million Americans don't have ready access to documents proving that they're American citizens, and something like more than 2 million people don't have a valid form of government-issued ID.
21 million people. Now, those 21 million aren't random. They skewed heavily toward a specific group, married women who changed their last names, elderly black voters in the South whose birth records are incomplete or were never properly filled out because they were born in segregated hospitals, students voting away from home. I had that issue my very first time voting. Native voters on reservations who don't have standard residential addresses, or low-income voters who don't own passports. That's about 40% of the country. One bill and one documentation requirement makes 21 million potential voters disenfranchised. And here's where the timing gets super specific. Pay attention now. The midterms are 4 months away, and the federal agency that helps run states' elections, here's what happened to it last week.
Preparing for an election takes months, sometimes years. From registering voters to maintaining voting machines, state and local election officials do the work with support from the federal government. But in the middle of this midterm election year, the bipartisan federal agency that helps coordinate those efforts is effectively unable to function. The agency lost its remaining commissioners after they were removed by President Trump last week. Thomas Hicks served on the U.S. Election Assistance Commission for more.
See, that agency can't function 4 months before a national election. Now, let me connect these dots. A bill requiring documents, an agency dismantled, and having their board members removed, a primetime speech about voter fraud, communism, Democrats, bad guys. All right. It's not just bad timing. It's not just coincidence. It never is with Donald Trump. Okay. But Trump's own former White House attorney didn't see that as a coincidence either. He saw the plan. Check this out.
Well, I think tonight's speech is intended to add the predicate that he needs to declare an emergency at or about the time of the elections. As you know, Steve Bannon and Todd Blanche have suggested that there will be ICE agents at the polls. I think that that's a virtual certainty. Whether that will include the National Guard or not, we don't know. But anything to intimidate minority voters.
Ty Cobb, a former White House attorney on PBS NewsHour, said, declare an emergency at or about the time of the elections, and then ICE at the polls. Then you get a virtual certainty, right? Those are his words. And today, literally today, John Thune confirmed that if the bill doesn't pass through regular order, that there's a backup plan. Didn't I say this? And that backup plan is reconciliation.
They give us a budget resolution as a vehicle. We will hold that, subject to obviously being able to move a continuing resolution to fund the government. It's a possibility that if necessary, we could pull that budget resolution passed by the House and use it to fund government. I hope that's not necessary, as I said.
Now, he said, I hope that's not necessary. But he didn't say it wasn't on the table. Reconciliation bypasses the filibuster. It bypasses that 60 vote threshold. One party can pass it alone if they have those votes. And that's exactly the procedural path that the SAVE Act would need, because it's not going to get that 60 votes. Even after that sham speech that he gave at the White House last week. Now I want to pull all of this together because the speech and the bill and the agency, they're all pointing in the same direction. The question isn't whether the 2026 midterms will be contested. The question is whether the infrastructure to contest them has already been built. All right? The doubt is there. Let me be clear about something. Trump spent an hour making claims about election vulnerabilities last week. Here's what CBS found when they actually checked.
I can't really answer that question, because if you look at the evidence that was actually presented last night, that this administration has compiled over 18 months in total control of the federal government, using all of the resources of the intelligence community, the Department of Justice, the FBI, the Department of Homeland Security, looking for evidence that would justify or support the false claims that the 2020 election was stolen. In fact, what was released last night largely confirmed that that election was secure. It confirmed that there was no alteration of the vote totals. There was nothing done that would have affected those vote totals. And while there's these claims of this cover-up that occurred, if you actually look back, almost all of this was known and publicly reported during 2020, during the Trump administration. A reminder that President Trump was actually the president in 2020 who was charged with protecting our infrastructure, charged with protecting us from foreign interference.
They found that the election was secure. We already knew that. The evidence confirms it. All right. The person charged with protecting the election infrastructure in 2020 was the same person now claiming it's broken. Trump was in charge during that election that he lost. Okay. Come on. Get real, MAGA supporters. So where does that leave us? The SAVE Act is not an isolated bill. It's just the latest iteration of the same strategy that has been refined for decades. They keep trying it. Like I said, the language might be new. The way they're doing it might be new, but the outcome is the same: to make it harder for specific groups of people to vote, and doing it through legislation that sounds reasonable, and then contest the results before a single ballot is even cast. You're saying something's wrong with it. Now you're talking about communism, and now you're talking about mail-in ballots, and now you're talking about China hacking an election. All of this 4 months before an election happens, a midterm election. Okay? Come on now. The news will tell you what happened, but I'm trying to pull together that pattern. Thanks for sticking with me. And the pattern is here. Okay? Create doubt about the system. Weaken the institutions that protect it. Pass laws that sound like common sense, but then disenfranchise millions. When the results come in, point to the very chaos that you created as proof of the system being broken. I mean, come on. You can't fight the pattern if you don't see it. And you clearly see this. So many people see that Trump is a crisis actor. He has to create chaos and crisis so that he has a problem to solve. And in the end, he still doesn't solve it. Are homes more affordable? Is gas lower? Are grocery prices lower? Are jobs any more plentiful than when he took office? No. But if you somehow are, have enough money to invest in stocks and meme coin and whatever else, then you're probably doing well. All right, see this pattern. All right, so going into these midterms, my hope is that you will see it. Not just the bill, not just this crap speech he gave last week, but the pattern. The same strategy, updated for a new election cycle with a new bill number, but the same old targets. See the pattern, not just the headlines, okay? This is what we do here. So as always, I want you to stay grounded, stay informed, and stay loud quietly. This is the Quiet Loud. Y'all take care.